Hey guys, I'm going to try to do this today where you can see the text a little better while I'm reading it to you. I don't know if this will work any better or not, but we're going to try it this way. Of course, I always put it on your questions as well. But today we're going to look at two major battles in the Civil War. As we continue on with our study, we're getting close to the end of the Civil War. We've got about 3 more lessons today through Wednesday, and we'll finish up the Civil War this week and have a test on Friday. So we've been moving right along and spending about a month on the Civil War. Let's look at these two battles today, Vicksburg and Gettysburg. Before we do, look at this guy right here. Kind of looks like a movie star, doesn't he? That's U.S. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, the general of the Union Army. And so let's find out what role he plays in these two battles. After Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, the central issue of the Civil War changed. But on the battlefield, the war was still about suffering and death. By the spring of 1863, the war was raging on 3 fronts. On the Mississippi River, the Union Army and Navy had fought its way north from New Orleans and south from Memphis. The only Confederate city left on the river was Vicksburg, Mississippi. Starting in May, Union forces attacked the city. They surrounded it, refused to allow anyone to come or go, and waited for the people in Vicksburg to get hungry enough to surrender. The people of Vicksburg still refused to give up, even though they were having to eat mules, dogs, and rats. Can you imagine? So here is General Grant's Army and Navy. They're moving up the Mississippi River to the last town on the river that the Union still holds, and that's Vicksburg. And so they surround it and don't let people get any food. And so the people are like, we're not giving up. We'll find something to eat. So they're eating their mules, they're eating their doggies, and they're eating rats just to stay alive. How long can they last? We'll find out. In Tennessee, the Union Army moved southeast toward Chattanooga. In Virginia, the Union Army continued to try to invade Richmond, but got nowhere in the process. Remember, General Lee was defending Richmond. They could never take it over. In June of 1863, after another series of victories, General Robert E. Lee invaded the North again. He took his army of Northern Virginia into Pennsylvania. We read about this in our textbook on Friday. Remember, this is kind of a review of that. So General Lee takes his troops up to Pennsylvania. He hoped that he could fight in the northern states, and the people in the North would not support the war as much. So where he hoped it would gain support for the Confederacy as it marched. Instead, his army ran into the U.S. Army near a small town in Pennsylvania. What followed was the Battle of Gettysburg, a 3-day battle that killed or wounded more than 50,000 Americans combined. The best-known phase of the Battle of Gettysburg was a charge by thousands of Confederate soldiers across an open field into a long line of well-armed, entrenched Union soldiers. This is known as Pickett's Charge. Since most of the Confederates who took part in the charge were under the command of General George Pickett. Up, men, and to your post, Pickett said to them before the charge. Don't forget today that you are from Old Virginia. A few minutes later, thousands of Confederate soldiers marched, ran, and charged directly into gun and cannon fire. A small number of them made it to the Union lines, where they were either killed in hand-to-hand combat or taken prisoner. Pickett's charge was a disaster for the Confederacy. After the charge had failed, Lee rode up to Pickett and told him to get his division back together. General Lee, Pickett responded, I have no division. Practically all of Pickett's men had been killed or wounded. After Gettysburg, the Confederate Army hobbled back to Virginia. The Battle of Gettysburg took place on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. As chance would have it, the city of Vicksburg, 1,000 miles to the southwest and on the Mississippi River, surrendered to the Union Army on July 4th. It's an important day in our country's history, isn't it? The father of all waters again goes unvexed to the sea, Lincoln said upon hearing the news. In other words, the Mississippi River is taken over by the Union Army. Here is a picture of Vicksburg. During the siege of Vicksburg, people avoided gunfire by hiding in the sides of hills. Dig a little ditch in the side of a hill and go underground. That's how bad it was. So 2 major things happened. The Battle of Gettysburg, Pickett's charge, thousands and thousands of Confederate soldiers were killed by the Union Army. And that was a major win for the Union Army. That was on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of July, July 4th. The people in Vicksburg finally give up. I guess they ran out of mules and rats and dogs to eat. They gave up, and the Union takes over all the cities on the Mississippi River. Here's U.S. soldiers in Virginia in 1863. Let's read about this speech. Remember what the name of the speech was that Lincoln gave after the Battle of Gettysburg? Gettysburg Address. 4 months after the Battle of Gettysburg, President Lincoln spoke at a ceremony to dedicate the National Cemetery there. The main speaker that day was Edward Everett, former governor of Massachusetts. Everett's speech lasted for more than 2 hours. Can you imagine? After his speech, Lincoln spoke for 2 minutes, saying, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It's altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor powers to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work for which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It's rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall have not died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Lincoln was sick that day. When he finished his short talk, there was little applause from the huge crowd. However, this 2-minute speech, the Gettysburg Address, is regarded as one of the greatest speeches in American history. In it, Lincoln refers to the statements in the Declaration of Independence about all men being created equal. This surprised people at the time, since Americans were and still are more likely to talk about the Constitution than the Declaration of Independence. Lincoln said the Civil War was about more than just union. It was about equality. Here's a picture of Pickett's charge with thousands of Confederates charging right into cannon fire. Would you be able to do that if you were in the Army? Run right at enemies shooting cannons and bullets at you? That'd been terrifying. Both sides believed very hard in what they were fighting for, and they were willing to die for it. 50,000 at the Battle of Gettysburg. My goodness. Well, you've got some more questions about this text today. I'll let you get to them. See you later.